The following podcast is scheduled for one fall.
It's almost time for a new chapter of GeeK KetchUp to start. But before it does, Chris and I wanted to take a moment to send our love and appreciation out to all of you for choosing to hang out with us. If you enjoy GeeK KetchUp, then make sure to slam that subscribe button and help us level up the show by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform.
You can also find us on social media to get updates on all things GK, interact directly with us, and content from the world of geekery. GeeK KetchUp Podcast on Facebook and YouTube, at GeeK KetchUp Pod on Instagram and Twitter, links to all of which can be found in the show notes below and on our website, geekketchuppodcast.com.
If you'd like to support the show, there's even links to our Square shop where you can find official GK merchandise like shirts and stickers. And Patreon if extra content is your thing. Above all, though, the absolute best thing you can do is spread the love for the world of geekery by sharing the GeeK KetchUp podcast with your friends and family.
Now get ready to enjoy today's show, and as always, remember to stay saucy.
If it's nerdy, we're into it.
Gaming, movies, television, wrestling, comics, whatever. We are Kyle Eckert and Chris Heck, two lifelong friends with a passion for the world of geekery.
And this is the GeeK KetchUp Podcast.
Welcome back, GeeK KetchUp family. I'm Chris Heck.
And I'm Kyle Eckert.
We're still just getting started with Season 3, and this is Chapter 42. Today we are traveling back to our favorite decade, the 90s, to jump in a tank and join the Peregrine Falcon Strike Force in their fight against an enemy army of soldiers, zombies, and aliens. That's right, Kyle and I are bringing you another retro game spotlight as we break down and review Metal Slug 3 on the Neo Geo Advanced Entertainment System. So as with most of our game reviews, we will be getting into the details of Metal Slug 3 and our ratings for categories like story, gameplay, etc. But before we get into all of that, we want to take this opportunity to chat a bit about the Neo Geo. It's not a console that either of us owned as kids, it's not a console that either of us have added to our physical retro collections, and it's not one that personally I have ever been too familiar with, other than just, the awareness of the name, the fact that it existed, and the fact that it's had a few core games that have been ported to like 1,000 other platforms. So Kyle, the Neo Geo platform was brought to the Japanese and North American markets by SNK Corporation in mid-1990 as an arcade cabinet first that allowed for up to 6 games to be playable from one machine. This was known as the Multi-Video System, or MVS for short, and it was fairly innovative because it helped arcade owners provide more games in a smaller footprint than what had traditionally been required with a one game per cabinet system that was typical with arcades. Alongside the MVS, SNK also launched the Neo Geo Advanced Entertainment System, which was the home console option, but there was a catch. It was only available at that time to business owners due to it being marketed as a premium system with a very high price tag. The idea was that businesses like game shops and hotels could rent the specialty console to its customers and use it more as a business model versus your typical home consumer item. But soon after that, the console became so popular that SNK realized there was a demand for selling them to private consumers, and they did just that in Japan and North America on July 1st, 1991.
Yeah, you kind of nailed it with the beginning there. The Neo Geo is not something that was ever on my radar as a kid or even as a teenager or well into an adult. Of course, everybody recognizes SNK as a company and the games that they create and a lot of the fighting games in particular that they're involved with. But up until, our little retro gaming spotlight here on Metal Slug, I had kind of only known about the Neo Geo as far as name goes.
Right.
You knew that it was a system, a console out there, but the full history of, the 6 games on one cabinet and then the advanced system that you just alluded to there, none of that. I didn't know any of that. And kind of hearing that, and finding that out, it starts to make a little more sense as to why it didn't really catch on for us in North America as kids because it sounds like it was never really targeted to be the at-home console the way a Nintendo Entertainment System or Super Nintendo, Genesis, etc. were kind of targeted to be that normal everyday consumer. But having experienced it now, like it really is something I think I'm going to go back to time and again because there are a lot of really high quality games for that system. You know, we played it on our emulator, so we opened up the full library there.
Right.
And it's been a ton of fun just kind of experience and hear about and research because a lot of, and that I feel like that happens from time to time, especially in video gaming history. Things will catch fire in Japan and then never quite make it to, you know, North America, so we don't get the full exposure. But then when you finally stumble across it, you're like, oh wow, where's this been all my life? Why haven't I heard of this before?
Yeah, it's true, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes. But I've got 11 factoids here, stats and facts around the Neo Geo that we're going to talk about. And I think once you kind of look at the whole picture, some of it really helps put in perspective as to why that was. And, you know, that first piece is the fact that, you know, it was a premium console. So I think that they were really going more for established video game fans markets. And if you look at the bulk of the games that are on this system, it really is almost like just a home arcade.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the games, if not all of them, seem to have been made first and foremost for the arcade business. And then, oh yeah, they ported them or they put them on this home console option. So that's one thing, but it was also, you know, it was the first system in the Neo Geo family. It was kind of their real debut beyond just making games. It was marketed as a premium system. It had a 24-bit processing core to it. So it actually had a dual processor situation where it had a 16-bit main processor and then an 8-bit coprocessor. And so that, I think, also really helped make it such a quality system from what we've seen over the years, because at that time, everything was either 8-bit, the SNES was 16-bit. So what the research pointed to with that was that the Neo Geo actually had better sound quality capabilities. It used some unique techniques like advanced technology called sprite stacking, which allowed them to get more data on the cartridges. So it really did help them stand out, even though maybe it wasn't as widely popular as the Nintendo systems.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the arcade stick, like the controller that it came with, also kind of sets it apart because it's a legitimate arcade style controller. Now, I saw on a few pictures they did release a controller that looks very similar to the SNES kind of design and shape, with the 4 buttons on the right and the 2 on the top. It didn't have the 2 on the top. The Super Nintendo did. But I think that absolutely sets it apart and kind of makes it very unique to set that standard that it's not like an extra controller accessory that you need to buy, like in Nintendo's case, because Nintendo did make those. You could buy an extra accessory that gave you the arcade stick layout, but this one said, no, this is the primary.
Yeah.
Like you should be playing on an arcade stick setup, which is very unique.
Right, yeah. And that makes sense too, because I mean, if you're really just trying to find a way to bring arcade games into the home and not have to worry about remapping or porting them or making changes to them to make them work on a controller setup versus a joystick, you know, you can see where that came from. But it was really cool. Like, it was also the first console to feature an external memory card. And it was a 2 kilobyte memory card, which is almost laughable in today's age where, like, everything is gigabytes and beyond. But I thought that was a really cool little nugget from gaming history, because we didn't see memory cards really at all on some of those original systems like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. Even the N64 didn't even have it right away. That was something that kind of came a little bit afterwards. And then it was the PlayStation era that really made external memory cards commonplace.
Yeah, I think everyone always jokes about having the memory pack on the back of their N64. And I know the Sega Saturn had a memory cartridge that you could put into it as well. But for most people, the N64 is the first like real memory of having memory cartridge, and obviously PS2 made it popular with the
Right.
colors and designs and the little rectangles. But it's wild to think that this existed like early 90s,
Yeah.
because N64 is a late 90s system. Obviously, the PS2 is a 2000 system. And here we are like, nah, this technology was there in the early 90s. It just it wasn't part of the big two.
Right. And it's funny because most of these games being arcade, they're kind of one shots. So like that memory card to me couldn't have been used for more than maybe like high scores and some of that kind of stuff. Whereas when we saw down the line bigger games, more RPGs and things where you really needed to take that time and save after a few hours because you still had 30 hours of game in front of you or whatever it
Right.
may be. It is interesting, but to your point, yeah, these consoles came out in 91. The N64 was 1997. I think PlayStation was 96, 97 in that same round. And then PlayStation 2 was 2001. So, yeah, I mean, they were almost a decade ahead of everybody else with that piece of technology.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think when you dive into more of the history of Neo Geo here, that's going to come into play because they had a long running history as well.
Yeah, and I thought that was kind of cool. The other thing that really blew my mind, and circling back to what you were talking about this not really ever becoming as popular, even though it did say on Wikipedia that the advanced entertainment system sold about 1 million units total across Japan. I mean, that's pretty good sales figures for any product. But when it was launched in the US, think about this if you're out there, right? Especially if you're someone that has complained about current game pricing. Think about this. In 1991, when the Neo Geo Advanced Entertainment System launched in America, the price tag was out of this world. And I don't know if you saw. Did you see what the price was? Did you look that up?
I did not.
Okay,
No.
do you want to take a guess?
Well, the way you're hyping it, I'm gonna go ahead and take a guess that it was $1,000.
That's a good guess. It wasn't quite that high.
Okay.
It was $649.99 in 1991. That is the equivalent of over $1,250 today.
Yeah. Could you imagine if it was legitimately $1,250 like for a PlayStation 5
Dude,
or
people
a
would
Xbox
lose
Series
their
X?
minds.
Yeah,
I would lose my mind.
Yeah, there'd be no way. It would never sell. People were upset about the potential of an $800 price tag.
Exactly. Dude, it is wild. When I saw that, my jaw hit the floor. And I say it all the time, people have short memories. Super Nintendos were $300 and $400, N64 $300 and $400. Those games $40, $50, $60. So the game market price-wise really has stayed mostly stagnant. Consoles have come up a little bit, but games and things like that, we just hit kind of the $70, $80 range for current PS5 games. But to go and look at this and say $650 for this console, even with a little bit increased capabilities, but you could go and you could get a Super Nintendo for, say, half the price.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is a big factor as to why we didn't see it as often, or we didn't know any friends that had one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some of that might also be the first party games that Nintendo was putting out and that Sega was putting out. Like, they were just a little more recognizable, a little more just friendly, I think, to families versus what I experienced when I kind of went around the gaming catalog here. Like, it was more of that strictly arcade style.
Yeah, everything seems coin operated. Everything's high score driven.
Yeah.
And so it was definitely a cool system to go back to. And thinking back on it, I could see the appeal there.
Oh, yeah.
But that price tag is huge. And from what I read, they did do a couple different packages. Like the $650 was something that came with the joysticks and a couple of games. And then there were a few cheaper options, but some of those didn't come with any game. So you were stuck. And this is kind of goes with it is also what blew my mind is to couple it with that huge price tag for the console. according to Wikipedia, they said that most of the games themselves were sold for $200 and up in 1991.
Yeah, that's wild. $200 and up that's another thing. I think you get nickeled and dimed on your FIFAs and your Maddens and things like that, where eventually you'll spend $200, but you would never expect someone to pay $200 up front for a single game.
Well, not for a single game. I mean, that's like $400+ today, to put it in perspective. But you also got to think that because these were built for arcades, almost every one of them can be built or can be beaten in under an hour. So you're gonna go pay $200, $300, $400 for something that you're gonna beat the first time, and maybe without all of the emulator benefits that we get, where we can get unlimited credits or whatever. Maybe you put more time into beating these games back in the day when you were kind of stuck with the 2 lives and everything. But still, man, just comparing it to today, I couldn't even think about it. Like, there's no way I could afford to game if this is really what we had to pay for everything that we touched.
Yeah, for like every single game.
Yeah.
That's kind of the wild part. You think, all right, in the end, have I spent $200 on Injustice and all of its expansion packs and skins? Probably.
Right.
But like that's one game in my entire catalog. This is every game that you want to play, $200.
Yeah.
There's just no way.
Right. And you're not getting, a year plus of replay value in the whole. I mean, maybe some people did, but
maybe some. Yeah,
to me,
you're getting
no
solid afternoon. A solid afternoon.
Exactly. So that was just wild to me to think back, and I mean, still selling 1 million units at that time at those prices is pretty impressive. But to wrap up some of the stats here, the console was sold for 7 years up through 1997. They supported it through 2004 and gave technical support through 2007. So it actually had a really long lifespan for a console.
That's the most impressive thing in the research when looking at the Neo Geo was the lifespan from the first release game to the last release game being supported, like 15 years. You just don't, see that anymore at all. We get 5 to 8 years out of a console, and then people are on to the next one.
Right.
It really blew my mind the more I looked into this and saw the 91 to 2005 lifespan of this console. It started in competition with the original NES and ended in competition with the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Like, that is insane. Like, if you think about where gaming went in that time span of the 90s,
That's true.
And everything involved, it's incredible to think about.
Yeah. And then they did come out, the original Advanced Entertainment System did evolve into the Neo Geo CD in 1994, and then the Hyper Neo Geo 64 in 1997. So SNK did still try to keep up with some of those trends and some of those evolutions, because I remember, you had the Sega CD and some of those other consoles early in that mid-90s, that they were trying to mess with that. But it seems like the original Neo Geo was really the one that most people gravitated towards and had the longest run.
Yeah, truly remarkable, truly remarkable. But I think it goes to the games, because the gaming catalog was so impressive, top to bottom, between, of course, like you said, they're all kind of arcadey to some extent, but there were run and gun, sports games. We saw a couple platformers throughout it. Like, it had a variety. There was a major focus on fighting games. I'll say that. A lot of fighting games, but the rest of the catalog was there.
And that was one of the knocks I saw on the original console when it came out, was that some of the, Game Informer type groups that were out there at that time did say that it was way too fighting game heavy at first, especially for those price tags. But I think ultimately they ended up bringing out more and more, and there are some RPGs and some other things in that catalog I saw. I think all in all there was about 118 games that were released, if I saw it right, for the original Advanced Entertainment System.
Yeah.
And they were very well received. I mean, that's probably the core, is the fact that there are a lot of games here on Neo Geo that have their place and were very well received, in maybe not like a Mario level of hype or things like that, but still in the gaming community, pretty highly regarded. And I think that is also why we've seen, some of those core titles, the Metal Slugs, Fatal Furies, King of Fighters, Samurai Showdowns, etc., get ported over to the modern platforms like mobile, PS, and Xbox.
For sure. It reminds me of when you see those Atari arcade collection games. You see almost an equal number of SNK collection
Yep.
the games.
Yeah.
And it's got all of those titles.
Yeah. So a lot of classics there. It was really cool to just kind of take this trip down and really fill in a hole, at least in my retro gaming experience and all of that. But I could not get away from it. We're going to talk about Metal Slug here in a little bit, but I definitely spent some time over the last 2 weeks bouncing around, just going in and out of games because there were so many that I was not familiar with, like Magician's Lord, and you found that Baseball All-Stars. There's a game called Football Frenzy out there that was kind of interesting as far as just an arcade, quick-paced football game. So a lot going on, and all of them had pretty quality graphics, I felt, and maybe even a touch better than I would say on the SNES as far as consistent across the board.
Yeah, oh yeah, I don't know if I thought of that necessarily when I was playing it, but now that you've said it and I really start to think of Baseball Stars 2 and the quality that game brought, and then in comparison to Ken Griffey Jr. Presents, which is very similar in game styles, like it actually almost had better graphics at some moments, more detailed cell shading.
Right.
And yeah, you're right, like, because you'd run into a really grainy game on the Super Nintendo that you can just see like the effort just wasn't quite there.
Yeah.
And which is probably really mean thing to say to the developer, the person that made it, that I said you didn't put full effort into it. But no, the consistency, you are right. The consistency from game to game is usually very high.
Yeah. And then the last thing I had here, just to kind of set it apart a little bit from what happened with Nintendo, and maybe it was part of the reason why they didn't grow the Neo Geo the way that Nintendo did, but I did see that it was called out specifically that Neo Geo did not have any of the real 3D capabilities. So I think that was kind of what changed, was even though they came out of the gate with that higher bit processing, they didn't build anything in. They didn't do anything to the cartridges like Nintendo did to be able to add in more of that shift to 3D. And I'm wondering, a little bit if that's kind of what started to maybe create such a gap between the two in the consumer market, was because everybody was getting so blown away by what they were seeing in Star Fox and some of these other games with that 3D tech there at the beginning.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And now, once again, reflecting on the games that I did play, they're all very, like, side to side.
Yep.
Or basic front to back. Baseball Stars 2 is a baseball game, so there are some three-dimensional elements to it, naturally. But for the most part, the fighting games that I played, a couple of the other sports games that I played, are all left to right.
Yeah, very 2D, very sprite-oriented. But super cool. Like, I definitely feel that I'm going to spend more time with the Neo Geo over the coming months and years, when I'm going back to the emulator, looking for some retro games to play, especially having that arcade stick now, that 8BitDo arcade stick that I finally broke out. And I'm hoping I'll be able to do a video on that here for our YouTube channel at some point to show everybody that. But I think that really also was the other motivation for me here, was because it was a console that was built for arcades, came with the arcade stick, like you mentioned, and then having that to play with instead of the controller, I think really just went hand in hand.
Oh, it's a total game changer because it's meant to be played with that.
Exactly.
When we did our Retro Game Sports Challenge, you were playing Tecmo Super Bowl on the arcade stick, but that game wasn't ever built to be played with an arcade stick.
Right.
So you're adjusting the natural flow of the game versus everything we played here. It's meant to have a stick and 4 buttons laid out in that specific pattern, and it changes the entire dynamics of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and the flow of the game.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. And I totally agree. I love fighting games. That has been established. And so stumbling across the Neo Geo and its vast collection of fighting games, I am going to get lost for years because I love the good and the bad when it comes to those. Like, I love a really solid, Street Fighter 2, it's a classic, the Mortal Kombats when they're good. But I also love really bad fighting games, like the Mortal Kombats when they're bad, or Primal Rage. Yeah, I said it. Primal Rage is kind of a bad game, but it's a ton of fun.
Right, yeah.
So, bopping in and out of the various fighting games and seeing the different setups, mechanics, and how they were built was a ton of fun. And one I absolutely want to point out is the final game in the Fatal Fury collection. And it doesn't match the Fatal Fury name, but it's called Garou Mark of the Wolves. And it came out in November of 99. That game had a system and mechanics setup unlike anything else I've ever played before in the fighting game arena. And seeing that it came out in 99, it was introducing elements that I don't think I saw until MVC2 or maybe other games that came out in the mid-2000s.
Okay. Like what?
Mechanics is double button combos, the double roll to activate super attacks and things like that. It was very unique in a sense where you could pick your character and then you pick a segment of your health bar. Depending on what segment of your health bar you picked, when your fighter got down to that segment, you would then get a specific boost for your life dropping that far. Like you would get double power.
Yeah, yeah.
And it kind of creates a little bit of a strategy because you could make it so you get that boost in the beginning.
Yeah, okay.
But if you all of a sudden get knocked down to a third of the way or 2/3 of the way, you would lose that boost. So you have to play this mind game of, well, do I set myself up to be double power at the beginning of the fight or when I need it later in the fight to make a big comeback? And I think in the competitive world, that could make a big difference.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. I mean, of course, you have fighting games, now that have those power bars you build up while you're fighting based on how well you do or how much damage you're taking. But yeah, a decision like that up front would be very unique for going into this battle.
Yeah.
Especially playing against other people.
And that's what in the competitive realm, like especially how fighting games get, like it really means you need to adapt in kind of how you approach each fight and who you're going to be fighting on the other side, because on top of that, there are the classic fighting game tropes of different styles. You've got your punch and kickers, you've got your grapplers, things like that, your range folks. Like, so all of that is also mixed into that fight. And I got attracted to that game because I saw on a couple lists where people had said this game never got the widespread acclaim that it should, but if it ever did, people would regard it as the greatest fighting game of all time. So, my ears perked up and I'm like, all right, I need to find this game and play it.
I didn't even notice it when I was looking through all the lists and through the list in the emulator of the different games, and it's probably because it has that different name, like you mentioned. It's not Fatal Fury.
Yeah.
Whatever. And so it probably just comes off as a totally different game. But that might be cool one day to do a video on for the community, just because I bet you there's a lot of people that have never even heard of it.
Yeah. And I can't explain why it didn't get the Fatal Fury tag. Like when every other game in that series, and it's 8 or 9 games, are called Fatal Fury something. Yeah. And then why in the very last edition did you switch it up? It seems strange, but who knows? I highly recommend, Googling it, or maybe I will get a chance to make a video. I'll need to hone my skills in a little bit before I go making a video to make sure that I can actually represent.
Yeah, some of those old fighting games are real tough at first. If you're not somebody that has that muscle memory from years ago, playing it as a kid, picking up some of them and going back through it can be really frustrating up front.
Oh, yeah. And I will say, when I played it, there were a couple things that kind of ported over from the Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat realm. Like, oh, okay, a roll forward punch. That's a Hadouken. Like, and my guy, it's not a straight fireball attack, but it is a ranged attack.
Sure.
So there's some similarities there that will certainly carry over. But yeah, the combos that it introduced and a lot of the aerial attacks that are also introduced will take some time to learn and master.
Nah, that's awesome. Good find.
So the other big game that I kind of wanted to bring up was Windjammers. Did you get a chance to play Windjammers?
No, I definitely saw that one on some of the lists of top games, but I didn't get to that one.
So Windjammers is an epic. Like, it's volleyball pong.
Oh.
And yeah, it's definitely worth the time to go and check out because it's been remastered once or twice, but it's not quite the same as the original arcade release. And I have to give credit. I know about this game because Xavier Woods from Up, Up, Down, Down, also WWE wrestler, is obsessed with Windjammers.
Really?
So, like, when I saw that it was a Neo Geo specific game, developed by Data East, I'm like, all right, time to get my hands on Windjammers, like a real version of Windjammers.
That's awesome. Oh, yeah, I might have to go check that one out before he put the whole bow on the Neo Geo thing right now and move to something else. I don't think I've ever caught him playing that, but I also don't watch enough Up, Up, Down, Down.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one. I think you'll enjoy it because it's that perfect blend of sports and Pong.
I mean, the coolest thing, though, about the Neo Geo is that since it is so arcade-focused, it almost felt like every single game could be a perfect, like, if not couch co-op, but just couch competitive, sitting around with a buddy or two and just bouncing through the catalog because they're all pick up and play, get in, get right to it, right, fast action. And so I was thinking about that is that in the future when we're hanging out or we got the guys together, like that could actually be something new that we work in of, hey, let's hit some of these Neo Geo games, whereas before, wouldn't have ever even thought about it.
Yeah, and that is the joy of the emulator, giving us that opportunity.
Yes.
But as a new console experience, the Neo Geo was certainly a surprise hit for Chris and I, with an impressive catalog of games and a lifespan that ranks up there with the best we've ever seen. Let us know what you think about the Neo Geo, or any other games that we should be checking out.
In the year 1999, a corporate syndicate known as Nanotech dominates the digital world. The public believes they are simply creators of their smart devices and helpful software. But one man knows different. One man has broken through the firewall and learned the truth. Nanotech is performing illegal psychological research on its customers. After all avenues of hope are seemingly destroyed, it becomes clear that there is only one way to stop them. Steven Seagal is the final option. Grab your pleather motorcycle jacket and favorite pair of denim as you assume the role of Steven Seagal. Infiltrate Nanotech's secret underground storage area and slow walk your way through this surprisingly low-tech dungeon. Face off against menacing entry-level electricians and scientists who are clearly no match for your knee-high kicks. And when you get bored of kicks and fists, forget the Aikido code, pull out your gun, and shoot them. Steven Seagal is the final option is brought to you by Tech Magic and RSP Inc. This thrilling action arcade homebrew is exclusive to the SNES and can possibly entertain you for about 10 minutes. Rated T for Teen, not approved by Tipper Gore.
Steven Seagal, the final option, is a fiery, hot mess for sure. And I'd say that maybe one day we'd do a spotlight, but I don't know if either one of us want to go through that much pain and frustration.
Nah, it would be like a 5-minute spotlight, because there's like 1.5 levels total?
Yeah, 1.5. Unless you put in the codes and you bump to the levels that you can't get to by playing the game. But either way, hot mess all around. But let's get to why we are here. That is, of course, Metal Slug 3, developed and published by SNK. This arcade run and gun released on March 23rd, 2000 in Japan for the Neo Geo console system, then came to North America in September of 2001. As one could guess, it is the third installment in the Metal Slug series. Gamers play the role of the Peregrine Falcon Squad, who are a small but elite platoon of soldiers who fight against a vast array of enemies throughout the series, including rebel armies, zombies, and even aliens. Metal Slug 3 is unique for its introduction of certain enhanced weapons and vehicles, and it also introduced alternative level pathways. The game has been ported many times since its release in 2000, including versions on the PS2, 3, and 4, the original Xbox, Xbox 360, mobile, and more. But for today, we'll be focusing on that original Neo Geo release that we played using our emulators. Before we get started with our breakdown here, we'll run through a quick reminder of the gaming rating system Chris and I use. The categories include gameplay, sound, technical performance, story, and the GeeK KetchUp special, sauciness. We'll reward a point or a half point for each of these for a total score of 5 that a game could receive. So with that, let's dive in. Chris, tell me about your experience with Metal Slug 3.
Yeah, so I was glad to go back and play this because I love run and gun games, right? And there's a lot of them out there, some good, some not so good. But this one, even though it's always been around, and it's actually one of the more recognizable Neo Geo games in general, I really hadn't played it very much. Like, this is one of those games that I've been familiar with. I always knew it was out there. I had touched on it here or there, maybe like a port or something at a friend's house back in college or, like way back in the day.
Right.
But I never pulled the trigger on any of the collections that you would see on the new consoles, PS4, Xbox, whatever.
Yeah.
I always wanted to, but just never did. So this was really my first deep dive into Metal Slug, and I don't think it disappointed, to be honest.
No. I think we were talking about the anthologies. They released a ton of anthologies that collect the whole series of Metal Slug games. But I'm in the same boat. I knew the cover art, and I think everybody is very familiar with the cover art for Metal Slug 3 and kind of like what the game looked like.
Right.
But similar to you, I'd never played it. Like, I had never touched this game at all. It was only the name, the cover art, and every now and then I'd see it on like a top 100 games of all time, type deal. And it was crazy because of all of those remakes and remasters. Like, they're well into the double digits as a series in itself, not including the various remakes, remasters, anthology collections. So I was kind of like, man, why haven't I played this game before? Because the run and gun is just a solid staple. Like,
right, yeah.
You think of the Contras of the world, and a Broforce really comes to mind after playing this game. Like, I always thought Broforce relied a lot on Contra influences, and now I'm thinking, no, Broforce is like totally Metal Slug and nothing else. Like, just the graphics are a little different. But yeah, I was not disappointed. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it has a lot going on in it.
Yeah.
It's when you're playing the gameplay, it is full tilt from the get-go. And so one of the things I had called out early on here, kind of overall, right, is that it is an arcades game.
Yeah.
Like, this game it hits all the notes and tropes and what you want out of a good arcade game. But on the flip side, I was thinking about, like, from the business standpoint, since it is pretty difficult, and we'll probably get into that when we talk gameplay and stuff, but I was like, man, this game was made to eat quarters. Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. It's just, I think it can be summed up as just overstimulating.
That's a good way to put it. It's like you're on coke,
Yeah. But I think of, like, we've talked about the Avengers and how much color and everything that's happening in that game in our last chapter. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that's nothing compared to the stimulation that you get out of this game. Like, between the colors and the bombs and the arrows going off in this direction and the aliens and the zombies and just shit is going berserk.
Right.
Like, your eyes are just darting all around the screen in all directions.
Yeah, you put in the quarter and it's like injecting adrenaline into your body because the music picks up, the action just goes from day one or moment one, and it just never stops. There's like almost no downtime in the entire game. But I don't want to get too much into giving away all of the thoughts on gameplay since we have that as a category. But where do you want to start here in our breakdown?
We're already there. Let's just go ahead and start with gameplay.
That's fine.
We're already on here. We'll talk some gameplay because it's straight arcade chaos.
5 missions, none of them are too long, except for the last one. I guess I will say that last mission in this game is pretty damn long, but start to finish, it is something that you can beat in about 45 minutes to an hour, especially with the emulator benefit of unlimited credits.
Yeah.
I thought it was really, really awesome just how you jump in. You've got the character selection. You've got lots of, vehicle and weapon diversity to constantly mix up the gameplay. I'm not sure if you had any favorite aspects from that standpoint.
I'll say contrary to what you said, I was averaging closer to 60 to 90 minutes per session, but I think that's because I was trying to like pay attention to everything that was happening, and I
Okay.
wasn't full on running and gunning. If I went back and did a legitimate run and gun and left enemies in my dust and didn't try to kill everyone on the screen, it would have taken me less time, but my playthroughs were a little longer.
Okay, yeah. I probably found that because I did play Metal Slug 3, I think 3 times all the way through here in preparation for this. And I did find that as I started to get better and was slowing things down a little bit to try and, save those lives and everything, I do think that my last run was probably more in that 60 to 90 minutes. But that first, couple of runs, and even with some of the other Metal Slug games that I played, I found like they were very consistent. Metal Slug 1 through 5 were all consistent 5 to 6 missions, and in that, we'll just call it 45 to 90 minutes.
Yeah, depending on your play style, because
Yeah.
if you're gonna take one thing they did introduce was those alternate level paths, and we can get into that, maybe story based rather than gameplay. So it'll be anywhere in that 45 to 90 minutes, depending on how you play it. But back to what you were talking about, weapons, there was a huge diversity in the weapons between your standard gun pistol to the heavy machine gun. You had a laser shooter, like I would assume you could call it a flamethrower. There were bombs, and I think there was one almost like a sheep launcher type deal. Like
Iron Lizard, I think is what
the
it was
Iron
called.
Lizard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if anybody's ever played the Worm series, they know that the sheep launcher is a fan favorite in that series. Great variety as far as vehicles.
Yeah.
Between the tanks and the mech suits that you could get, and then even airplanes. And then when you would inevitably get knocked out of the airplane, you get the either little jetpack to float around on.
Right.
The underwater vessels were there as well. My personal favorite is when you go to level 4 and you hit the desert, and you
Yes.
get to ride the camel.
Yes. I was
With
going to
the-
ask you what your favorite vehicle was.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt, my favorite vehicle is the camel.
Battle Camel.
Yeah, the battle camel in level 4, where
Yes.
you're just straight up riding on the back of a camel, and they have dual machine guns
Yeah.
attached to its hips that can fire in a total 360 direction. That was far and away my favorite vehicle.
Well, in the Battle Camel, I don't know if it did this for all of them, but I felt like the Battle Camel was the only one that wouldn't self-destruct if you took too much damage. You just got shot off of it. So if you could maintain the camel through the whole level, you
Yeah.
actually got a huge bonus point boost at the end. But it was by far the best, jumping around on that camel. And because they weren't just machine guns, they were like laser machine guns.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's the 90s where we can't use real bullets, so we have to like laserfy
That's
everything
true.
and
That's
make it like a large flash. It was, yeah, the battle camel was by far the best. And when it comes to like standard weapons, I think the rocket launcher was pretty cool, especially the one that was a homing missile.
Yes. Enemy Chaser.
Enemy chaser. Yeah, I'm trying to think, of some of the sound effects were a little hard to pick up on what they were saying.
Yeah.
But they were there. But like the one that sticks out is like heavy machine gun.
Right.
Like that one was very clear cut of what it was saying.
Yeah. I liked how they were all limited use too, like whether it was a vehicle or a weapon, because it just kept you, cycling through them, and it kept the game engaged, and you had slightly, not a whole lot because of the type of game, but slightly different, way that you would approach it depending on exactly which weapon you had or what enemy you were going up against. There was also a lot of enemy diversity I felt throughout it, so you had some that took a little bit more damage, whereas others, you could easily kill with kind of the basic pistol.
Yeah.
But it also made you constantly tap the button. Like some games you can just go in with a running gun, you're just holding X, you're holding down that arcade button, and it's just unlimited fire. Whereas this, no matter what gun you had to constantly stay engaged and keep it running.
Yeah, and when you think about the arcade stick versus a controller, that's perfect for that, because instead of using your thumb to tap 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 tap, you're just using your pointer finger or middle finger to just kind of give it that push down.
Yep.
And it does, like, because you had limited bullets, but you rescued enough prisoners because as you're working through the levels, you would rescue prisoners of war and then they would give you boosts. And I think that there were enough of those laid out throughout the levels that even when you ran out of ammo and defaulted back to the pistol, you knew that a prisoner of war was coming up soon to give you that. So you were never in I need to conserve my ammo.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The only thing I hated was that you got enough weapons power-ups that if you weren't careful at times, you would lose them.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
like, you may see a laser, which is a pretty strong weapon, come out with the more common heavy machine gun at the same time, but you can only have one at a time. So if you grab that laser and then accidentally hit the heavy machine gun, or you're in one of the moments where the power-ups are swirling around the screen, then you lost the laser. Now you're stuck with a better weapon than the pistol, but not as strong as, rockets, lasers, some of those types of things. So there were a few moments of frustration because you were like, oh, I wanted that even more powerful weapon, and you would just miss out on it.
Yeah, and that would also happen for me because you die so easily. Like, you can't take too many hits, if any at all, in some situations. So you would get that power up and then just take a hit and die. And when you die and you respawn, you lose the weapon. And that became so frustrating because you'd be in a serious moment, like a critical moment. And you really need that laser. And you just get hit by like a stray bullet and you die and you're back to the pistol. And like that's almost, it makes you squeeze the controller on my end. I know you were playing with the arcade stick. But I would squeeze the controller and be like, Kyle, what have you done? Like one of those.
Dude, the game is insanely hard. Like, there is no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And, other running guns are hard. Contra's hard. Everybody knows Contra's hard. But I felt like this one was more so just from the chaos. Like, the amount of enemies on the screens and enemy bullets and, just it gets hard to see at times. Like, no matter how careful I tried to be, even after I had played through the entire series and was on, second and third runs, like I was getting better, but it was still impossible to do this on 2 credits. Like, I'm sure somebody out there is that good, but for me, looking at it, and I've got my numbers here, just going through, like, I mean, I averaged anywhere from, I think the lowest in the entire series amount of lives or credits I used was 26, and the highest I used in one run was 65. You know what I mean? So, like, there was no way around dying. And to my point about the quarters earlier, I thought that was really what kind of put it in perspective, because if we go back to the 90s, let's just assume 50 cents a play, 50 cents a credit. You're talking anywhere from like $10 to $12 minimum up to $30 and $40 that you might have spent in the arcade if you were like, yes, I am going to sit down and beat this game here while I'm at the mall.
Right, yeah. There's no way. That's your whole night. That's your whole night. Even if it only takes 90 minutes to beat the game, that's all the money. That's all the allowance money that you've saved up for weeks. I did all those chores, and I'm blowing it on Metal Slug 3. What the heck?
Yeah.
Yeah, the game it made me think of Ghosts and Goblins, and we've played that in the past, and we called that a very hard game with very little room for error. And I think this game also is in the same category, really. Like, you need to be spot on with your jump and then duck. And really, a comparison, if anyone's ever seen the movie Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, and kind of like, I know it's based on manga, but the way Tom Cruise is by the end of that movie, where he relives the same day over and over and over in the middle of a war, he knows exactly where to shoot, when to duck, when to roll. I think you play this game enough times, you'll find that rhythm, because I had the same thing by like the second, third run. I knew what was going to happen on level 1.
Right.
So you were able to get through it a little faster with fewer credits. And so, like, you build that memory of what's going to happen. But if you were to ever do this on 2 credits, you would need to be Tom Cruise in Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah,
you would need to be able to blindly shoot in one direction, because a zombie's going to pop up under the ground when you hit that spot.
Right. And it's the variety of attack types, that come at you. You're getting stuff from the air. You're getting stuff from maybe below you, to the sides of you, bombs, like missiles that will home and chase you. I mean, like, it's like everything all at once. So even if you were to manage to like make a perfect, bounce duck around the just standard gunfire that is coming,
Yeah.
you're probably just going to get smacked in the ass by a homing missile that you just physically couldn't look at while you're focused on all this other stuff that's happening.
Yeah, your eyes just can't handle everything that was happening around you. I know more times for me, I was being chased by a homing missile, which you can shoot.
True.
You can shoot them down before they hit you, but I'd be running around trying to avoid the homing missile and shoot them, and then there would be a stray bullet kind of layered behind
Yeah. Yep.
a missile. So I would shoot a couple missiles, knock them out of the air, dodge the ones that I need to dodge, but then just out of nowhere, a little stray blinking blue and yellow bullet would hit me and I would die, and I'd be like, you just, it's always, you're dipping and dodging and weaving aliens and zombies and rebel armies, and then it's just a regular trooper that just shoots you.
It's true. And then you've got enemies in vehicles and machines that take a lot more damage before you can get through them. You had shielded enemies. I mean, the diversity was there, but you brought up the zombies, because I thought that mission with the zombies was really cool, because it also introduced the fact that if you got hit by a zombie, you would turn into a zombie.
Yeah.
And that would change your movement speed, your shot cadence. You didn't have the quick grenade. You had this weird, slow building, like giant laser blast out of your face, which was an interesting thing that zombies could do. But you know what I mean? Like, so it just totally changed the gameplay then that you had to deal with.
It was like a flaming Godzilla, like, bleh.
Yeah.
And it would go like ground to ceiling and just annihilate anyone in front of you. And then eventually the zombies get to use that against you.
Right, yeah.
Which is really
horrible.
difficult. But the zombie level was pretty cool. It threw in some diversity early, because that's like the second level, I believe. And like it is thinking Metal Slug 3, there's already been 2 installments. It really kind of changed it up and made you approach the level differently and slow it down.
Right.
Because there is this desire to just run and gun, obviously. But the zombie factor is like, okay, I need to slow down because I'm going to shoot these folks. Then they're going to light on fire. I can't get hit by the fire. And then if I get hit, I get the extra life, but then I can't duck as quickly. I can't move as quickly. I've got the broken leg to deal with. Like, there was some diversity, and it kind of, I don't know, elevated it for me. It really took it next level, because it just showed off once again, it showed off that diversity.
Right.
Kind of something different, so you're not just pounding B, jumping, and running.
Yeah. Well, and each level had its own kind of secret path, so you could create some diversity that way too, because it wouldn't just be like a room that you'd have to come back out of and then proceed down the standard linear path that you would see with a lot of arcade games. A lot of times if you took that second path, or you found the secret, like I'm thinking about the ice cave, and stuff like that, not all, but a lot of them would actually still take you to essentially the final boss area, the end of the level, but you would have a different set of, obstacles to navigate, maybe more enemies, different kinds of enemies from the rest of the level. So I thought that was really cool. And it was also important because if you wanted that high score, like a lot of those secret paths were where you would get more chests, more bonus points, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you kind of have to make that decision. It's going to take multiple playthroughs to figure out what is the best pathway. Like, do I do the secret path with the extra chests and maybe a higher risk of dying? Or do I take the standard path and take the prisoners and then, not die as often? Some kind of, that gives it replayability, I'd say.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Because it definitely mixed it up as I went through. And there seemed to be a difference in difficulty as far as if you took the standard versus some of the alternate paths. Like I'm thinking about in the one level where you end up going down and it's like it takes you underwater. That underwater section was much more difficult than just the standard run through, but you came out with more prisoners of war rescued, more upgrades in the whole 9 yards. So it did seem worth it, even though it Probably also cost me a number of lives.
Yeah, it's for true. True. It's going to cost you that high score, or maybe give you that high score. Either way.
Yeah, both ways. And then kind of forwarding up a little bit, when you get into that final level, we talked about going from typical human run and gun to the zombie level. When you get into that final level, that is, I almost felt was like as long as the previous 4 levels combined, but you go into it, you're running through normal, and then you end up in this like 5-part final boss. If you think about everything from the moment you fight the commander in the Chinook helicopter to him getting abducted by the aliens and you're going up, but you end up going from Earth into space, and then the game kind of turns into Space Invaders.
Oh yeah. Oh, for that little level of Space Invaders. You put it perfectly, because that's actually one of my favorite segments. Not my favorite level. I'm telling you right now, that desert level with the camel, just everything involved. That's my favorite level. But yeah, the Space Invaders piece is pretty cool because you're shooting vertically, and it very much is Space Invaders with the way the enemies come down and their rotational pattern and firing as they go. Like that is. There's no doubt that the people that created that level, that coded it out, designed it, had Space Invaders in mind.
Yeah, you're just bouncing through, and everything up until that point is left to right. Now you're going north up and down, and you run from like one boss fight to the other. You go from that Chinook, like I mentioned, into fighting like a double UFO. You blow them up, they turn into like a giant Independence Day style UFO mothership. Then you get in the mothership, you fight this alien machine that was very like Metroid boss like from back in the day.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you're like skydiving, fighting an alien head in the middle of the sky. But it's just like one thing to the next throughout this entire end. And I'm like, man, they did not want people to beat this game in the arcade,
No. Well, that's where I use the majority of my credits. Like after a couple runs and you really start to have some confidence. In my final run, in my best run, I was like so good on credits and where I was using my lives, and then I hit that kind of level 4 to 5 range, and I burned easily 3/4 of the credits of my total credits used in that final 5th level.
Oh,
Just
easily. Yep.
Fighting the final boss with the exposed brain as you're falling through the sky, like that was like 20 credits in itself.
Yeah, and that was consistent. Like no matter what I'd try, when I'd go back in subsequent plays and I was ready for it and I was like, I'm going to avoid his green snot bubbles coming up from the bottom. Like you can't. Like it's like really, really difficult because it's all randomized,
Yeah.
Like in the game, you would find that certain enemies would definitely still show up in the same areas as you're going through the levels, but some of those cadences of the shots and where stuff would come from, the stuff you actually had to avoid seemed to be mostly randomized. So it was a different experience from like the details,
Oh yeah. Like I'm thinking the final boss of Super Mario World, where the pattern in which the fireballs are going to drop from the sky. You know where you can stand to not be hit. And it's the same every time you play that boss level. This one, totally different.
Right.
Sometimes you got to go left, sometimes you got to go right, sometimes you got to jump up and then duck and then shoot here, because you could also jump up in the air and shoot down.
Right, yep.
And most of the guns provided that 360 kind of shot track. And so you had to stay on your toes. And I'm having flashbacks of G&G because we said the exact same thing there, where it was like not quite procedurally generated. And the fact that but almost, like it was the beginning stages of kind of what that would look like and what that would feel like in a 2D space.
It was just different enough.
Yeah.
That you could never fully get there like you could with some other games. Because that was always the deal with a lot of those old games, right? It was really about who could memorize them the best. And you get those speed run plays and those guys that can, because they know exactly where the Goombas are going to come from, whatever it may be. And when you take that away, it just changes the entire situation with these old games like this.
For sure. And it makes it that much more tragic when you do die, because you're on a good run and you got a nice streak. The high score is pinging up high. You've eaten one too many fish. Your person's looking bloated because that definitely happened if you ate too many like watermelons or fish or the various food things that fall on the ground to give you boosts, and you're feeling good, feeling confident, and then just chaos ensues and you die, and you're like, damn it, I was on a run and I'm wasting credits.
Yeah, there was a few different things throughout this game with the zombies and the weight you could put on, but then also some of the others I saw in the series, they had like there was levels where you would turn into a mummy, and
Nice.
so they did some of that throughout the series. But I have to say, I think that when you get fat and you eat all the food and like your guns change a little bit, that was by far my favorite like modification that you could get, just because it was so comical and amusing, but
Yeah.
you're still like running full speed. You're like 3 times the size.
Yeah, well, and I think it's funny the way you would die would change as well, because instead of just like getting hit and falling over and doing the like you would burst from within.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was pretty cool. I thought dying as a zombie was pretty cool too, because you wouldn't just like you would get shot and you would die, you would turn into a zombie, and then when you would die a second time as the zombie, like your guts would start like spewing out
Yeah.
of you.
Your
That
head
was pretty
falls
cool.
off.
Yeah, your head falls off. Exactly. It was pretty sweet. So
Yeah.
I think gameplay is where this game shined.
100%.
It took the cake. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about the gameplay because I think that is the focus, and typically is in an arcade style game. You want strong gameplay to keep people putting quarters in, and this had it top to bottom.
Yeah, 100%. It's all that this game is about, and anybody that's listening out there is about to realize that when we get to some of these other categories, they're going to be short-winded because there's just not a whole lot there.
Yeah.
But yeah, gameplay top notch, up there with the best of them. I would put it as far as just a run and gun experience. And I'm curious though, before we get into our ratings and moving on, what was your best high score? Because I know you were playing on the controller. You were using your 8-bit Do, controller, whereas I was using the arcade stick. And as I was playing, I kept wondering how much of a difference it would make. And I'll tell you why after we...
So I actually wasn't using my 8-bit Do.
Oh, okay.
When I Googled and looked up what the Neo Geo controller looked like I said, we saw in the first half, we talked about it was an arcade stick, and then they also made a controller that was very similar to the SNES, except for instead of having a D-pad, it had a stick. And so that immediately screamed Wii controller.
Okay, yeah, that's a good call.
So I used my Wii controller, and we've talked about this whenever I play the emulator, I try to match the controller that the game was built with.
Okay, yep.
And I thought, since I don't have an arcade stick, that's the best option for me, is to use that Wii controller and not the Wii Mote, like the Wii controller accessory.
Right, yeah.
For anyone
the classic controller.
The classic, yeah, the Wii, thank you. Yeah, actually, it's called the Wii Classic controller. And so I used that. And I actually had moments where I would adapt, and I benefit from having small hands, which is another running theme here, is I would lay the controller on my leg and play it like a mini arcade stick.
Okay, yeah.
It was few and far between when I did that, but I did do it. So in the end, my highest high score was 2,367,319.
Okay, and how many lives did you take?
I took 61 lives.
Okay.
It was brutal. I was rough when it came to continues.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that was my first run, was at 65 lives, so we were pretty consistent there. The reason why I was curious about how you ended up versus me was because I found with the arcade stick, especially the way the 8-bit Do is laid out, where you get 8 buttons and they're maps, so you have like the core buttons all in like one little 4-square area.
Yeah.
I found after my first run or two of these games that I was playing with 3 fingers at all times. Like,
Yeah.
I had the stick in the left hand, and then, thumb, pointer, and middle finger all on 3 different buttons for jump, shoot, and grenade. And it was pretty much doing all of them at the same time, especially with boss fights and the bigger enemies. And it started making me wonder, like, because I could tell how much more effective it became when I started playing like that. And then it was making me wonder, like, man, if I had to do this with just like the thumb and constantly be going back and forth button to button versus being able to do it all at the same time, I figured I would have had worse performances, worse final scores, and more deaths.
Yeah. So I imagine yours is about to trump me when you tell me your scores here. It's about to blow mine out of the water. But
No.
I think I was able to adapt. Like I said, I credit to our good buddy Mike Fee, because I've seen him play video games that way, especially Athens 2004 back in the day. I know that's how he played that. So I was inspired by Mike in how I've seen him play various fighting games over the ages and kind of adapt his PlayStation controller to mimic that of an arcade stick. So that's where the inspiration kind of came from, knowing that was an arcade stick-based game. But what were your final scores?
That was a good thought on your end, to be honest. That wouldn't have gone through my head. I'll just say that. So
Yeah.
They were all pretty consistent. My first run, 65 credits used, 2,256,738. So we were pretty close there. But by my third run, where I had my best and I'd gotten familiar with the game, I only used 45 lives and had 2,516,929. So I got you by a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'd also played probably more throughout the 2 weeks, so I was getting more familiar. And then, maybe the arcade stick setup was a little beneficial, but it sounds like not as much as I was thinking.
Yeah. And I got 3 runs in. I got my first run is I came up just short of 2 million on the score, but I used almost 80 continues.
Wow.
Yeah, it was rough. My first run was like, oh my god, this is going to be a brutal retro game spotlight. And then I got a second run. I didn't get to complete it based on how our emulators were working. You needed to do this in one shot, and
Right.
I just ran out of time. And then I only got a third attempt. But I imagine if I went back and I played it a few more times, I would get a little more confident with it. I know you played the entire Metal Slug series. I only got to play Metal Slug 1 and then put my focus on Metal Slug 3. And I think that would help in the pattern of just the game.
Right.
Because
yep.
I think that factored in all the games that I saw in the Metal Slug series kind of looked the same looked as if they would play the exact way.
Oh, they do. That is one thing I had here, and we'll probably touch on it when we talk story a little bit. But yeah, all of them that we had. So it was Metal Slug 1 through 5, and then Metal Slug X, which is essentially just a remaster of Metal Slug 2. They are all very similar. They are all 5 to 6 missions. They all are pretty difficult. Even some of the missions actually kind of get reused in different editions too. Like
Right.
They're not all completely unique. But just to call it out here, Metal Slug 1, 26 lives, 465,319. Metal Slug 2, 31 lives, over 1 million high score. Metal Slug 4, 47 lives, 673,000. Metal Slug 5, 30 lives, 569,000. And Metal Slug X was 37 lives. So, I mean, I feel like they had different difficulties, and I actually came to the conclusion that personally, my thoughts is that Metal Slug 3 was the hardest of all of them. And I think objectively, you can kind of see that. Like, none of them did I get close to 65 credits used or 80 credits used, but like Metal Slug 3 was more consistent that way. But the difference in high scores was also a big thing. Like, some of them had very low high scores, when you ran through them, and others were built more for that big boost, and maybe it was the different pathways or some tweaks that they did. But I thought that was kind of interesting, even though almost everything else game to game was the same.
Yeah, they just got like a little more generous in the things that would give you bonuses. Because I started to realize that there were little things like apples, bones, other things that were on the ground. One thing that also comes to mind is when you pick up health, if you don't need it, it instantly gives you 1,000 points.
Yeah,
but
everything.
If you need it, it doesn't give you those points. So, like, that is all going to factor into the high score.
Right, and they were all fun. Like, I don't want to say it as a true knock, because in this era that's kind of just makes sense. But really, I just think SNK found a very winning formula and then just continued to duplicate it. Probably sold millions and millions of dollars worth, so it completely worked out for them. But once you kind of put it all together from that standpoint, the gameplay, there was not really like a reason to be like, I'm going to pick 3 over 5 or 1 over 2. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
only difference I saw was a touch of technical performance issues in 2, and I think I'll cover that a little bit more when we get there. But
Okay.
everything else was like within margin of error of how similar it was, from a
Yeah.
gameplay standpoint.
Well, and that makes sense because they started to come out like boom, boom, boom. Because I think Metal Slug 1 came out in 96, 2 came out in 98. So, and actually looking kind of on this pattern, they were coming out every 2 years, putting out a new one. Because Metal Slug 3 was 2000, 4 was 02, 5 was 03, then 06. So it's like, they're not totally, unless they're going to pull like the Call of Duty and go back and forth with 2 developers so they can do that offsetting schedule, you're going to see some repeats.
Right. Well, why don't we give our ratings for gameplay here, and then we'll touch on our other categories. So where did you have the gameplay here?
It was a 1. There was no doubt in my mind. It is exactly what it set out to be. Arcade chaos. I said it before, and it hit that spot on. So it's a 1.
Yeah, I have to agree. There was a part of me that was like, can I give it a 1.5? I don't know, because like it was definitely a ton of fun and had no qualms, playing it repeatedly throughout the last 2 weeks. It was always super entertaining, but I did keep it at the 1.
Yeah, definitely deserves it. But we can move on to technical performance because you brought it up there in Metal Slug 2, had a bit of a knock there. But let's talk about the technical performance of Metal Slug 3.
Yeah, I thought honestly Metal Slug 3 and most of them all were really, really smooth. You think about for a console of this age with that much going on the screen with just multiple sprites. I mean, sometimes there's like 20 enemies on the screen. God knows how many dozens of bullets flying between you and them and everything like that. The power-ups you mentioned, the background, everything going on. I really didn't have any lagging or visual issues, and some of that could be the emulator build helping it a little bit versus truly, a physical retro console and cartridge. But in Metal Slug 2, it was very hitchy and laggy, and you would have these spots where you'd see the screen kind of almost like blink or something, but it was like a pause real quick, and then it would pick back up. Didn't keep you from being able to go through it, but compared to 1 through 5, the other ones, it was the only one that was noticeable.
And see, I actually had lag. I experienced lag. Yeah, when all hell was breaking loose, it would slow down.
Oh, see, I didn't have that in any of the other ones.
Yeah, I experienced that on a few occasions when it came to Metal Slug 3, like especially when there were bigger bosses, plus the background, plus when they were like spitting out the little ads that you had to kill.
Yeah.
Like I would hit spots where I would go to jump, and you could kind of noticeably see I was doing a slow motion jump.
Oh, so yeah, that's what I got in 2, but I don't think I called that out or saw that in any of the others. And I even saw when I was doing some research that the reason why Metal Slug X came out was because they knew that Metal Slug 2 had technical issues. And then I guess they changed the architecture, like the programming and how they built Metal Slug 3. So the whole idea was they wanted to come back and redo 2 to give it the justice. So they did it under the new architecture, and then they revamped like more enemies, some new weapons. They definitely changed it up enough to make it worth it. But essentially, it's a copy that they did just to give it better performance.
That's amazing. SNK, I wish you had lasted a little bit longer. Because that sounds awesome. Like
right?
That's what you want to hear out of game developers and makers. My other knock on technical performance, and this is tough to put it in the technical performance area, but there's not too many other places to put it, is the hitboxes seem to be a little sketch on a couple of the enemies. And especially in a game like this, where it's not going to be very forgiving as far as what you're going to get hit. Like, I would like some of the hitboxes to be a little cleaner. And there's actually a specific moment that I'm going to kind of lay in on. And it's you're fighting the alien that's dropping the purple beam down. And in some cases, you can easily jump over that purple beam as it swipes across the screen. In other cases, you make the exact same jump with the exact same timing, and it clips your foot, and you die. And it just becomes very frustrating. Like, I just need a little more consistency out of the hitbox. And I think the same thing would extend to the missiles and the stray bullets. Like, I understand you want to make a difficult game, and you totally succeeded in doing that. But, like, you need to be a little more forgiving or precise with your hitboxes.
I can see that. I don't think I know what boss you're talking about. I don't think I ever successfully avoided his beam. You know, are you talking about the one that like blows you into a bunch of coins like Sonic? Like when it would hit you?
Yeah. And you can actually lose high score points.
Yeah. You got to collect them back. I don't think I ever successfully dodged that, but when you talk about the individual bullets and things like that, I definitely had a number of moments where I thought I was going to be good with the angle I took or my duck, and still died, you know? So that frustrated me. I don't think I took it as like a technical issue per se, though I see where you're coming from. I kind of wrapped that into like old school games, you know?
Yeah, and that's what I said. I didn't know what category to kind of put this in, and so by default, it like fell to technical performance.
It's fair, yeah.
But that, and for those reasons, like it's kind of like the one thing that kept me from giving technical performance a perfect score.
Okay, so where'd you end up giving it?
I gave it a half point.
Okay.
I figured it, with all hell breaking loose, it's gonna lag. That is expected. It's an old game, and it performed very well for how much was really going on. I'm just being hard on it and saying, like, there's a few minor details here that prevent me from being like, oh yeah, it's definitely a 1.
I think that's fair. If I had seen some of that lag, I probably would have dropped it down. I ultimately gave it a 1 because looking at just Metal Slug 3, in my experience, like I didn't see the lagging and stuff, so I thought it was actually pretty smooth. But that is kind of funny. It really, I think, is just that perspective of experience. Because for me, I was like, man, for how much is going on the screen, the fact that it didn't lag, you know.
Yeah.
But since you saw the other way, I think that I can understand that.
Yeah, and who knows? Like, but it's definitely how it went down for me.
Yeah, totally fair. So on kind of that same level, right, we can go from technical performance over to graphics and sound. So where did you have that?
So out the gate, I'll tell you, it was a 1. I thought the sound alone, and once again, Kyle is playing into classic Kyle things, the soundtrack was bumping.
Yeah, dude.
Every level had just awesome tunes that got you going with your run and gun, just pow, 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 pow. And once again, it was that level 4 desert music with kind of like the Aladdin theme that was playing, just the little EDM Aladdin action. It was the sound alone. I was like, oh, this is a 1. And then graphics for the age, for the time, for the background, and the 2D build, all exactly what I would have wanted for a game of that era. So a 1 all around.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. I gave it a 1 as well. Graphics were great. The only thing I'll add to it, because you're right, the music was awesome. It was like that mixture of like high energy EDM with also some cool guitar at times to give it that metal, rock edge at times. But
yeah,
I thought the narrator was also well done.
Yeah.
He would come in and heavy machine gun and, whatever. He was calling out the things you were picking up and the different stuff that was going on. And I thought that gave it a good vibe. It's not uncommon in retro games, but for whatever reason, as I was playing it, I just kept thinking about the Halo narrator,
Oh, yeah.
When you're playing multiplayer, double kill, stuff like that.
Headshot.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and the sound effects go a long way in a game like this, because I think the sound of when you're firing your gun, when you're killing your enemy, when you die, I had a sound bite that I'm totally confident was pulled directly from Contra. But all of that was really spot on, and it made every villain and every enemy and then level in its own right feel unique and kind of different than the one that you just did.
Right. Yeah, and without getting too techie, going back to what I called out earlier, I think that they got the payoff here with the Neo Geo architecture, like the sprite stacking technique that they use that I mentioned. From what I read, that allowing them to get more onto a cartridge, they said that it did help the visuals, a decent amount, but one of the big upticks that they got from performance was the sound quality. They were able to actually get more, involved, I guess probably bigger tracks, essentially, more going on with the sound effects and the music and the narrative. Like, they were able to actually do more on the Neo Geo because of that architecture choice than maybe what Nintendo or somebody else was able to do.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool, and right on par with everything else that we've talked about, like elevating it, making it that arcade-worthy experience where it's like everything is happening on the screen visually and in your ears.
Yeah.
Like, well done, hats off.
Made you want to kind of turn it up, even though you didn't need to. Like, there was times where I kind of just wanted to bump it because of everything that was going on.
And for sure.
Yeah.
I may have put on, Metal Slug soundtrack while I was at work this week.
Oh, there you go. Man, surprised you didn't kill a coworker off that. Just get hyped.
Get hyped. Okay, I always think that when somebody walks by my cube. What are you listening to? Metal Slug 3 soundtrack.
Right.
Let's go.
Throw a grenade at him, paperweight grenade.
Paperweight.
Anyways, but so I think we both had graphics and sound at a 1.
Yeah.
One
I
star?
think so.
Okay.
1 star.
All right, and then that, of course, takes us over to story, which might have a slightly different opinion on.
Yeah, story is tough. So what I wrote here is story. Did it have a story?
Right,
Like, yeah, because and then I started thinking, oh well, the era, arcade game, like home console, maybe it was in the booklet. But then I thought, oh no, not if this was built for arcades. There is no booklet in the arcade.
Yeah, not if you're playing it in the cabinet, yeah.
In the cabinet, like, you're in the mall, you're in Pocket Change or whatever, and you're playing it. There's no booklet there to tell you that story. So story was a little lacking. They didn't even give you like an opening cinematic to kind of set the tone.
Yeah, exactly. And I kept having you in my head from when we talked about Ghouls and Ghosts and things like that, because you had called out in there how there wasn't really much dialogue, there wasn't cutscenes, it was very, very minimal. And so even though most games back then were minimal, you still got something.
Yeah.
And here, you got nothing at all. It's just jump in, play. The characters have names and stuff, but you get nothing. Like, it's just a big fat 0 across the board. And so that's actually the original reason why I said I'm going to go play Metal Slug 1. Because I was like, well, maybe there's some stuff from then that just wasn't as necessary here in the third version. And nope, it is the exact same situation for all 6 games. 0 story, 0 cutscenes, 0 dialogue.
Well, and that's like the interesting part, because you go and you look online and the game has a lot of lore out there. It's like the Peregrine Falcon Squad, and you've got Marco and all the other characters that are happening. And my thought was, where is this? Like, how did you get this information?
Yeah. I did not know anything until I went and did some online searching. And in a game like this, is it needed? Not necessarily. But from a rating perspective, breaking it down like this, to be fair, right? You would want to see something to be able to give it some points here. I had it at a flat out 0.
Oh, just a flat out 0. So I gave it a half star. And I had very specific reasons why it gets a half star. And obviously, there's no intro and nothing in the booklet, nothing you get there. But the kind of visual story it tells you as you play the game, I thought did deserve some credit, because like in the very first level, you're fighting a standard army, and then eventually you fight the big general, but then he turns out to be an alien, and then that's when you go up in the alien spacecraft. And so there are a lot of like little things here and there, like definitely the bosses that you fight seem to tie the whole story together.
That's true.
And like the different reveals, and then the big one, which I think gave it that final boost. Like, I think that stuff alone wouldn't have been enough to give it a half star. But the final piece of the puzzle is in mission 4, at the end, your character gets stolen and abducted by aliens.
Yeah.
And then when you go to play mission 5, the character that got stolen, who is no longer available to be picked, ends up being like a cloned machine that you then have to fight. Like the aliens are cloning that character and you're fighting like little versions of them throughout
Right.
the entire level. And I was like, okay, it's not telling me like a real story, but as far as like a visual story or an in-ring story, as it's telling me here, I thought that was pretty cool and kind of gave it that final nod of it does deserve a half star because that's pretty awesome.
I think that's fair. I don't think I can argue that. I did like that little touch. I'm glad you brought that up because that touch, and depending on which character you lose at the end of mission 4, the sprites for those like zombie alien clones are differently designed, specific to what that character looks like. So that was a nice little touch.
Yeah.
But, I was kind of looking at it all around, and especially after I had gone through, essentially all 6 games, and it was pretty much the same thing. I was like, yeah, it wasn't necessarily needed here, but there also wasn't anything really here. So I gave it the 0.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. It's kind of the same kind of line of thinking of why I docked it a half point for technical performance. Is like my experience was just slightly different than yours. The other piece that I'm going to have to go back and play and see if it actually does carry over. I'm pretty confident that the weapon that I had and was using when I got abducted is the weapon that they started using against me later in the game.
Okay.
Because when I realized that the last time I played it, the person that got abducted, I was using a shotgun. And then the shotgun is what that character was using when I was battling them. And the previous times I had played, I'm pretty confident they were just using the standard pistol.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't think I noticed that at all. So that would be
Yeah.
interesting to go back, specifically looking for that. So that's a cool little touch. You do have that 10 minutes and then like the final boss fight that you have to deal with after you rescue your character. So there is some time where they're kind of working with you a little bit. So I'll have to go back and look at that next time I play.
Yeah. So that was story. So it ended up getting the half point. But to close out our kind of rating system here is sauciness. And that is sauciness, our X factor. Does it have, the it that makes you want to come back to it? And I'll let you go first on this one. And do you feel that it is a saucy game?
It's pretty saucy. I ended up giving it a half point here just from the standpoint that the gameplay and everything is so good that you could come back to Metal Slug 3, any of them really, and play them at any time.
Yeah.
I think that they immediately jumped into that category for me where if you and I are sitting around or somebody's over or whatever, easily could add this to the list of games that you could jump in and couch co-op. So I thought that it had that level of sauciness, but that said, the lack of some of the other things and just the repetitive nature, I think that it isn't a game I'm going to personally go back and regularly play as a solo player.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's saucy, but I don't know if it's saucy enough to be like, yeah, when I'm pulling up the emulator and looking for some retro games to play, go back through my favorites or, just like what happens every now and then. You're going to hit the Mario Kart or whatever, maybe, those staples. I was like, I don't know if it's going to quite hit that level for me.
And right on par with you. I'm not going to sit here and say it wasn't enjoyable because it was definitely a fun experience. Glad we did it. But I'd agree. I don't know if it's something I'm going to consistently come back to in the long term.
Yeah.
Like I do like the style. And couch co-op would be fantastic because it does have a 2-player option. But is it going to stack up with the rest of that kind of back catalog that we go back to? I don't know.
Right.
What I do want to do, and something that you have done, is play through the entire series.
Yeah, I thought that was worth it.
That would be fun for me. I've played 1, I've played 3. I think it would be fun to play the entire series. But I also don't think it's going to be one of those things where I go out and I pick up every single version of the remasters.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the best way I would sum it up is that if you are someone like us that is really into games, really into retro games, the history of games, it's important enough to say, go play it, add it to your repertoire and your history. But maybe not going to be like number one on all-time greatest retro games, if that makes sense.
For sure. I would absolutely say if you could catch it on like Switch for cheap, because it did get re-released on Switch in 2017, it is be a fun Switch game to kind of take on the mobile whenever you need to, or in party situations. It would be fantastic.
That's true. That would be a good way to play it if you were to pick up one of those remaster collections and instead of the PlayStation, grab it on something like the Switch. I think that's a good call out. So what was your total rating here as we wrap up?
So in the end, with gameplay at a 1, sound at a 1, technical performance and story at a half, with sauciness also at a half, it ended up being 3.5 total.
Okay. So I think we ended up taking different routes to get to the same end place. Very fitting for Metal Slug 3, since that is exactly what you can do in the levels. But I ended up at a 3.5 out of 5 as well, with really just, I think, the difference being that technical performance and story change between the two of us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as a cult classic for the Neo Geo, Metal Slug 3 lived up to the hype. And if you haven't played it before, we would highly recommend scooping one of the many remastered versions just for the zaniness alone. As always, hit us up on social to let us know what you think of the Metal Slug series, Metal Slug 3, or what game you'd like to see us highlight in our next Retro Gaming Spotlight.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this discussion, go ahead and smash the subscribe button so you never miss a chapter of GeeK KetchUp, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to follow GK on social media. You can find links to all of our accounts on the show notes below and on our website, GeeKKetchUpPodcast.com. There's even links to our merch store and Patreon if you'd like to support the show. But as always, remember to stay saucy, you nerds.